I want to start off by saying that the information that I'm going to take you through over the next couple of days, there really is a presumption on my part that you know your human design. Because one of the concerns that I have, that I've always had, is about what happens to people when they start comparing their chart to somebody else's, let alone what that means at a professional level. You know, it's one thing to begin a process of understanding yourself and coming to grips with who you are, but if you really don't know design well, when you put two charts together, you don't really know what you're looking at. It is a different mechanism. It operates in a different way, and it has different rules. And so it's something that's very important. All of us want to know what our relationship is with the other. And the beauty of design and the magic of the way in which we can look at it and utilize that image, it gives us a profound insight into what relationship can be. You know, it's one of the more rewarding readings that I've done over the years, is to be able to sit with a partnership and to be able to take them through the design. It's very funny, you know. It's funny in the sense that to be able to see so clearly where all those points are in your relationship, and then to be able to work with them. So before we can really go in and dig into what partnership is all about, the first thing to recognize is the basic thing that human design teaches us. It's not about, we're not here to be in reclamation jobs. You know, you get a relationship that comes to you and it's two not selves that have met each other and they got all the problems that go with all of that. And it's not like you're going to be able to sit them down and take them through their partnership chart and you're going to be able to do wonders for them. It's not true. First of all, the fact that they didn't enter into the relationship correctly in the first place, and that's most human beings, means that they're already dealing with all kinds of conditioned problems. And that conditioning can be reinforced by the fact that we have children in those relationships. That we have all kinds of deep bonds, responsibilities, and all kinds of other things. I want to give you a hypothetical environment that we're working in over this weekend. And that hypothetical environment is if you could meet somebody correctly. Because you see, if you meet somebody correctly, you don't need partnership analysis. You don't have to be concerned about how this goes into that and this connects to that and all that stuff. The essential thing about having a good relationship is that you have to be yourself and you have to enter into it as yourself according to your type. And if you enter into a relationship correctly and you enter into it according to your type and its strategy, you are going to have a relationship that's of value. Now, it doesn't mean that it's going to be Prince or Princess Charming. And it doesn't mean it's going to be a bed of roses. It doesn't mean any of that, because it's not about that. We're here to experience all kinds of relationships, whether they are good or bad relative to anyone's other, someone else's perception. But the fact is, to enter into a relationship correctly is not to look to get out. It's not to look inside and say, why did I do this? It's not to torment yourself with the fact that you've made the wrong decision and now you're paying some kind of terrible price for it. You see, the most difficult thing in a human being is to have a place inside of them where they can make a decision and they know it's correct. It doesn't matter what the consequences are. So when you have people come together and they come together correctly, then you know that you're going to have a valued relationship. What we can look at is that because we're going to deal with not only in our own lives, but with the people around us and the people that we're going to deal with, that we're going to deal with all kinds of relationships initiated out of the not self, that all we can begin to do is talk about the strategy of how two human beings live with each other. You see, it's a matter of respect. If partners are willing to look at their own nature and the way in which they operate, and if they are willing to experiment with that, You know, there's so many women in my life who are generators who have gone home to their husbands who don't know anything about human design and couldn't care less. And they go home in their relationships that are 5, 10, 15, 20 years old. And instead of babbling and getting caught up in manifesting trips and all the old programming, they're sitting there waiting to respond, and when they're asked something, they go, And you know, they get a vicious reaction to that. It's difficult. It is very difficult to get out of the conditioned field once you're in it, if there's only one of you. You know, it isn't going to help you to know that your husband is a manifester or your wife is a projector unless they themselves are willing to understand what that means, because it's mutual. It doesn't work unless it's mutual. And there is no honesty unless you operate in that way. The not self is inherently dishonest. It has to be. It's not what it is. It's always trying to live up to something that it's not. When you come finally to looking at how two people come together, there's a basic things that you have to be able to understand. First of all, you have to be able to look at those two people, and you have to look at them separately, regardless of the relationship, lovers, blah, 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 whatever. And you have to look at them separately, and you have to see what is their definition, what is their type, what is their authority if they have it. Because already you know out of that how they're going to enter into the mechanics of a relationship, or how they're going to deal with the other once they're already in that relationship. You know, if they find out that they are a manifester, then you know that all of their trouble is from the fact that they're not informing their partner about things they're about to do. You know, you can give them a strategy. You can say, look, you're going to take the pressure off yourself with your partner by simply telling your partner what you're going to do before you do it. You know, if you understand somebody's type, if you understand their authority, if you understand those things in their nature, then you have to see that their experiment is not only living that out for themselves, but it's how they apply that in their relationship with the other. See, everything about design is about that experiment. And if you don't have both partners ready to make that experiment, it's not going to work. You know, it's not going to work. I mean, it's one of my favorite jokes about design. You know, I can teach you until I'm dead. I probably will. But you know, all this stuff I can tell you about, you know, it doesn't really matter. Not unless you're going to be a professional at this, not unless you need to have that depth. But it's not about your life. You know, your life begins and ends with honoring your type. There is nothing else. And the whole thing to recognize about that is that no matter what I can teach you, no matter what is the ultimate perfection of you looking at your own design and seeing the potential that's there, that it comes out automatically if you're living out your type. Because that's the basis of it all. Then you're going to enter into things as you should, as you. You know, that's the whole beauty of this process, is that you don't have to spend a lifetime in meditation. You know, you don't have to spend 9 years, you know, educating yourself. Anybody who is told what their type is has that opportunity to experiment with it and to become themselves. You know, that is what it's all about. So when you're looking at two human beings and you're looking at the way that they come together and the way they deal with each other, the primary ingredient is going to be the type. And you have to be able to look at those two people and see, you know, how are those two types, whatever they may be, how are they going to mesh together? The other day, I made a joke about, you know, two generators living together. How do they do that? Right? And of course, one of the things to recognize all the time is that, number one, we are not in any kind of isolation here. We're in a program. And the moment that you bring two people together, you have all kinds of complex activation and definition. And when you add the program to that, The vast majority of generators who are together, for example, are manifestors when they're in each other's aura. You know, it's very different. And the whole thing about two generators, as I described, is that one generator says to the other, because they can take advantage of the conditioning, the manifesting capacities there, they say to the other, would you like to go to lunch? And the other one goes, uh-huh. But it can't stop there. This is what I mean about one partner can't be the one that knows. Because you see, that generator that's initiating out of taking advantage of the conditioning, you know, they can't trust that. They can't trust their own initiation of asking, would you like to go out to lunch? But it's coming out of them, it's natural. So their partner that goes, uh-huh, then has to say to them as a response, do you really want to go out? So that they can go, uh-huh, too. And you got two generators that are dealing with each other out of respect. And it isn't putting a limitation. They don't have to spend their time grunting each other up to some kind of decision. You know, it doesn't work that way. But what happens to us is that we take our design or we take our type or whatever and we hold it in isolation somewhere. You know, it's like when you look at your body graph. It's like, you know, this is me. You know, it's never been you. I mean, it's never been you. You know, that body graph is full of everything you're ever moving through all of your life. You know, none of us have empty spaces in this room. There's no white spaces in the aura of this room. You know, we're taking in all of this stuff all the time, and then we're saying, hey, hey, this is mine. Yeah. You know, it's what we work from. So when two people come together, they come together as types. Oh yeah, we're going to look at all the formulas and all the ways in which that works. But you know, if they don't honor each other's type, they don't have a relationship. It's as simple as that. You know, if you do not honor the other person's type, that relationship at one point or another is simply going to fall apart because it's not real. And you also have to see that in order for a partnership to be able to live that way, both partners have to participate. Both of them have to be in the experiment, otherwise it does not work and cannot. And will be deeply frustrating. I mean, I know how many situations like this where there is so much frustration. One of the interesting things about design, because it's not about UFOs, is that the mathematics and the mechanics of it, because they're verifiable, at some point partners actually do look. You know? I get the husbands rolling in, you know, 3-4 years later, you know. They sort of finally get to the door. But you know, it takes time. You know, that's part of our trauma and our role. You know, anytime knowledge starts somewhere, you know, it has to start with all kinds of people who have problems. You know, it's got to start with all kinds of mature adults lost in a conditioned field. You can't just start with suddenly there's an education for young people coming into the world. So the first thing that we have to see is that you have to be able to look at the individual chart and you have to be able to see what the type is, because that's the entry. Look at your relationships. I mean, look at them. Think back. You know. Did you enter into them correctly? You know, think back. It's an incredible thing to realize, no, we didn't. No, none of us, me neither. You know, you look back and you know that. See, that's the whole thing. And here we are with our lovers that we love and our dogs that we care for and whatever else. You know, we entered into all of that incorrectly. So that's, you know, that is not something that you can simply eliminate and replace. You can't. You can't. It's also part of your geometry to get that in the middle of all that. You know, and out of that you have to do the best you can to educate what is around you. There is no other way. And you have to begin living out your own type, because that's the basis of it. See, when somebody comes to me, when partners are coming to me, they don't care about themselves. You know, they don't. You know, the vast majority of not self relationships are based on something very simple. The other person seems to want you. You know, well, that's what it's about. You know, everything beyond that is kind of magical and inexplicable and whatever. But the fact that somebody needs you or wants you makes you feel good. You know, you spend your whole life in front of the mirror saying, well, you know, I'm not this and I'm not that and blah, 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 and I got to be this and I have to become that, and, you know, that doesn't look nice and I better fix that. And, you know. And then all of a sudden there's somebody there who says, oh, you're terrific. I like your not self. Oh, it's true. You know, if you thought about how we entered into relationships, you realize how humiliating it is. You know, because nobody's ever falling in love with you. They're falling in love with what you're not. You know, what you're conditioned to be, what you pretend to be, what you want to be, what you hope to be. I mean, it's a joke. And then they come to you and, you know, you got to do this. Well, this is your partnership. You know, it starts with them. You know, it starts with them. It starts with you. It starts with me. It starts with us. You know, it starts with living out your design because it's the only way it works. And of course, what happens in that is that you're either going to find that you have partners that will put up with it, you know. You'll have partners that resist it mildly. You'll have those that resist it vehemently. You know, you'll have all of that. And it's part of the challenge. You know, but there is no way that you can translate this information and take it into your relationship if you're taking it in alone. So I want you to see that. The terms that I'm going to take you through, all of this stuff we're going to do this weekend, you know, this is about dealing with not self relationships that come into your life so you can read them. So you can read how confused they are about their relationship. You know, but that isn't what it's all about. It is a service you can bring them. And yes, it has value, like all things that have value that can be revealing. But it's not what it's about, and it's certainly not what it's about for you. You're not going to be able to fix your relationship that started off as the not self simply because you have this knowledge. You know, knowledge is not power, it's just information. You know, the ties that we have with the other are far beyond our capacity to do anything about it. You know, we're able to look at it and see it for what it is, and we're able to come to grips with what conditioning has done to us. You know, it's not about any of this information being of curative value. The only cure is to be yourself. It's the only thing. You know, it's the only way. And to be in a relationship with somebody who is themselves. I mean, that's romance. You know, that's something that can be very beautiful. You know, that's something that has a basic honesty to it. Huh? You're going to need certain tools to be able to look at the way in which people come together. And they're subdivided into 3 different areas. One is the physical body graph itself. And in the physical body graph itself, we're going to see the way in which, first of all, the partners are aligned to each other, but we're also going to see the 4 different ways in which anyone can meet somebody else in the mechanics of the aura. You know, we have 4 ways in which we can meet. One way in which we can meet is called dominance, and dominance is when you have a whole channel and your partner doesn't have anything in that channel. And a second way in which we can meet is called companionship. And in companionship, you both have exactly the same channel, and you share that same channel together. And then you can have compromise. Compromise is when one of you has a whole channel and the other partner has half of that channel, or one gate activated in that channel. And finally, there is the electromagnetic connection. That is when each partner has a gate, the harmonic gate, at either end of a channel. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you're going to have to be able to work with the way in which profile operates. You see, it's out of profile that we get to see somebody's purpose. And we get to see the ability for them to be able to fulfill their purpose in this life. It is one thing to understand the mechanics of that vehicle. That vehicle has to operate out of its type. But it's another thing to see that purpose is something else. And that we come together in all of our relationships to fulfill purpose in some way or another. And that there can never really be true love. That is the kind of love that is true love within the paired bond. Whether that, by the way, is sexual or not, is not the point. It can't exist unless there is resonance or harmony in the profiles. And we're also going to see that the way in which profile works is going to influence the aspects in a relationship that are going to be keys. And those aspects in the relationship where you're going to be able to see keys, this is going to give you the opportunity to be able to analyze where the problems are going to arise in the connections between the two. You know, I'm going to simplify as much as I can. You know, I've taught partnership now twice? 3 times? 4th time now? Now this is the most sophisticated level that I'm going to teach it at. And the more sophisticated you get, the more simple you have to be. So I want to start you off with some simple poetry. Look at this body graph. This is Princess Grace and Prince Rainier of Monaco. By the way, all of these illustrations are from a partnership course I did in Europe, so you're going to have all kinds of... This is your European cultural class as well this weekend. When you look at that body graph, remember that the body graph is the gateway, is the entryway into this knowledge. And the more you can grasp things by just looking at that body graph, they used to call that in psychology a Brown study. You know, you look at it, but you don't see it, but you see everything. You know, it's about seeing that body graph, you know, what that's giving off as a vibration that tells you everything about whether that's a person or that's a relationship. Now, obviously, when we're looking at an individual, we're looking at the body graph in a different way. We don't expect the body graph to be so colorful. If we saw that as an individual, we would be surprised to see all of these centers being defined. In other words, the individual is always going to have much more openness in their design. And that means that the impression you get when you're looking at a partnership graph is that pressure is you're used to looking at the individual. You've got to put that aside. You're looking at a different kind of matrix here. You're looking at a combined matrix. And that means that the complexity of it is different, and the two coming together are always greater than what they are apart. In other words, we have this law of mathematics, the whole being greater than the sum of the parts. When you look at that body graph, I have a simple little rhyme for you. 9 and 0. You know, 9 centers defined. No centers open. 9 and 0, nowhere to go. Now get the image of that. 9 and 0, nowhere to go. If you've got a relationship and the two of you come together and you have 9 centers defined, what it's saying to you is that you're stuck within each other. There's nowhere to go. Everything is internalized. These are people that swallow each other up. They get absorbed in each other's life. There is no room for anybody or anything else on the outside. They can be locked together in bliss, or they can be locked together in anguish. But they're locked together. And it means that nobody's going to be able to help them from the outside, because nobody can get in. And they're only going to be able to work it out from the inside. And this is the kind of partnership that's so intense that when there is weakness there, that weakness becomes a sore point, because that's the place that they end up going to in each other when things don't work within the relationship. So it's a simple little rhyme. 9 and 0, nowhere to go. 8 and 1. 8 and 1, have some fun. You have 8 centers defined, you got 1 center open. Now look, when we're looking at an individual and we're looking at the openness, what we're really looking at is a window that's open and everything is coming in, right? Then we look at an individual design, we look at these white centers, they're undefined, they're basically a window that's open, and it's open to what can come in. Okay. But when you're looking at a partnership, it's the other way around. It's a window you can go out. 8 and 1, have some fun. Go out the open window. So for example, if you're a partnership and your head center is undefined, all the other 8 centers are defined, that's the place to have some fun. The two of you have to get into inspiration together so that you don't turn everything in on yourselves and you have a common ground for you to go out together. So 8 and 1 is a very fortunate composite, because there is this one place where they can both go out. So for example, if you have an undefined splenic couple, they got 8 other centers defined, spleens open, the way they have fun is finding out how to feel good. And they do that together. You know, they go to all the herbal festivals and, you know, that's where they go out to have some fun. So the 8 and 1, you have some fun. 7 and 2, there's work to do. I know. It's my karma to have 7-2 relationships. Think about what happens when you have a 7-2. When you have a 7-2, you don't have the advantage of the 8-1. There's only one window. They got to go out together. But 7 and 2, you got 2 windows. And that means one can go out one window and the other one goes out the other window. And they have fun alone with somebody else. So 7 and 2, there's work to do, so that you can figure out how you can both go out both of those windows together, that you can both have fun in those. But of course, by being able to give you a simple rhyme, it also tells you that the mechanics themselves always work in this simple way. And that if you're brought in your geometry to a 7-2 relationship, it is because you are equipped to deal with 7-2 work to do. You know, it's what's there for you in your geometry to meet. And of course, if you're in a 7-2 relationship and you enter into it correctly, you know, that's exactly what's there for you. You better work that stuff out. Okay. 6 and 3. Better to be free. You know, there's so many windows. There's this impression that there is a commonality in the 6 centers. However, 3 centers open is a dilemma. There are so many different windows to go out of to escape. And these are escape relationships. In other words, you go in knowing you've got all those windows to go out of. As a matter of fact, you only go in seeing the windows so you know how to get out. You know, where is the doorway, where's the exit before I get in. It's 6 and 3. It's better to be free. And the last one, and you will not see this very often, is the 5 and 4. And of course, it's not a relationship anymore. So 9 and 0, nowhere to go. 8 and 1, have some fun. 7 and 2, work to do. 6 and 3, better to be free. 5 and 4, it's not a relationship anymore. That is, it's not a relationship, obviously, that's ever going to be able to work successfully at an intimate level, particularly if it has to do with career, even more than love. Remember that love relationships that become sexual relationships can become reproductive relationships that create conditioned auras in children. And then the whole thing changes in the way in which the partnership operates. And that the vast majority of people that will come to you for a relationship analysis are not people going into relationships, but people trying to stay in relationships. And they're the ones with children, and they're the ones with much more complex auras involved. It's very common for couples to be able to seek shelter through the aura of their children, so as not to have to deal with the reoccurring mechanical problems in their relationship with each other. So being able to look at a formula like this is an advantageous formula for you going in to a relationship, not once you're in there. You know? I mean, yes, obviously it's going to be able to tell you what's at work in that. But because there's going to be the complexity of children particularly, it's not a gauge that you can use. You know when they're alone as a couple that that's at work. But again, so much of what human design represents is preventive medicine. You know, it's about how you get into things. We have to tell our children, you know, so that they can understand that when they get into a relationship, as they're going in, they know what's there for them. It's not about lessening its value that you discover it's a 6-3 and it may not work. It may be fun, after all, for as long as it works. But knowing that that is the kind of relationship where there's always going to be the exit, where there's always going to be the temptation to get out, allows you to see that relationship for what it is and to enjoy it for what it is without further expectation. You know, nothing has a greater expectation than partnership. You meet somebody, you fall in love, there is automatically this bizarre expectation that this is eternal. You know, relationships are full of expectation. They're full of the expectation that there's going to be trust, that there's going to be loyalty, that there's going to be all of these things. It's all expectation after all. You know, the only way you know that you're going to have a partnership in which your partner is always concerned about you is if you're in a 9-0. And you don't want to be in a 9-0 all the time. I mean, you know, we need to have a mix of everything, but, you know, if you want somebody that deep inside of your skin, you know, then you're going to have that if you have a 9-0 relationship. But other than that, you know. So these simple formulas help us because they can give us a valid guideline for going in. Here you have a classic, I mean, it's a classic 9-0 relationship. Know where to go. You know, she was just, you know, together, you know, pulled into this clawing, you know, that word has such prejudice to it, eh? I take it back. I take it back, you know. I mean, after all, I'm not responsible for what I say. It's the whole thing about drama and dualism. You know, it's so much fun to play either side of the drama and all of that, because it's always there. You can say, oh my God, these poor creatures, you know, deep inside of each other's skin all the time, no way out, you know, no other place to be but in each other's lives. Now, of course, that also can be beautiful. I mean, not to me, but it's clear to me that that is something that can also be very beautiful. However, you know, when you see that, and you see that in a relationship, you know that unless they're clear going in, they're going to have a lot of problems. They don't have an outlet other than each other. And if that's a not self relationship, they don't really know each other at all. You know, they're locked into each other's not self. Difficult piece of business. Okay. Profiling. You know, 70% of what we are is the program of the neutrino stream from the sun, and it's grounded by the earth. You look at somebody's profile, you look at 70% of what they are. You look at 70% of what their thematic is in this life. But most important of all, what you're looking at is that you're looking at the basic geometry of their incarnation. You're seeing what they are here to fulfill as a purpose through that profile. And when you look at the profile of Rainier, you can see that he is a 4-6. He has a 4th line personality, Sun Earth, 6th line design, Sun Earth. Now think about the keynoting of the 4-6. The keynoting of the 4-6 is the opportunistic role model. That's his profile. That the 4th line personality is the personality that is there to be friendly. That it's only through friendship that that personality is going to be able to secure as a sexual strategy the right mate in their life. That this is somebody that has to court someone. This is somebody that has to date them, somebody that has to take their time, has to become their friend, has to get to know them, and it's only out of that friendship are they going to be able to cross the line and turn that friendship into a sexual relationship. That the fourth line opportunist is very fixed in the way in which that personality operates. In other words, the 4-6, though it is made up of two upper trigram lines, it's still right angle. In other words, it still has as its geometry personal destiny. But remember what I've told you about the 4-6, that the 4-6 is a voyeur in that sense. That their gift of being able to interact socially through their fourth line personality is so that they can watch from the unconscious platform of their sixth gate. And particularly the 4-6 is voyeuristic when it's in the interregnum between its Saturn return and the Chiron return, between 28 and 51 years of age. During this time, the sixth line is in that phase of its process where it's up on the roof being aloof. So what you have in the 4-6 is that you have this waiting through its relationships to take the opportunity to influence others. But while it's waiting for that opportunity, it's up there on the roof watching everything objectively. That's the way it plays out its life's theme. That's how its purpose gets to be played out. In other words, this is the opportunity to actually ultimately become a role model. Now think about what the sixth line teaches us. What the sixth line teaches all of us, whether it's in our profile, whether we have it in gate activations or not, is that the sixth line teaches us that all of us can become role models after our Chiron return. Something to think about. The process of the sixth line is that it spends its first Saturn cycle, that 28 years plus, it spends its first Saturn cycle living out an essentially third line theme of trial and error. It goes from the end of that Saturn cycle to the time that it's around 50 years old, 51, the Chiron return, going up onto the roof, being aloof. But what we know, and I tease all of my fellow Chiron people right now, every 30 seconds someone in America is turning 50. We got a whole generation of people that are entering into this Chiron phase. First time consciously ever we have a generation that's living this out. And we're going to be, as a result of that, the first generation since the body graph changed in the 1780s to a 9-centered system, that we went from the Saturn cycle to the Uranian cycle. It's the first time we're going to live out the modern life cycle. And that modern life cycle flowers after 50. In other words, all of us get the opportunity to be able to, as a potential, synthesize our life experience, integrate it, and then live it out. And live it out without being self-conscious. Live it out correct in the way in which we operate in the world. In other words, for all of us to become wise as to who it is we are, so that we can be living role models. Now obviously any sixth line being is going to carry that theme. So for them it's much more accentuated in their process. In other words, somebody like this, you have to see what a sixth line sexuality is going to look like. He was a famous playboy. Up until his Saturn return when he was 28, that sixth line unconscious was the one night stand, let's go for it, baby. And what he lived out was his third line trial and error, having relationships that didn't work, being disappointed in those relationships, being pessimistic about the possibility of what relationships can bring. And then when he gets to the end of his 20s, then he goes slowly up onto the roof, becomes objective and aloof, and what he's looking for in that situation is a detached but viable relationship. It's only when he gets to his Chiron that he's ready again to come down off of the roof to see as a sixth line being, as a role model, if love is something that can really be there for them. So we know in looking at that profile that we know what's there in order for him to be able to fulfill that purpose. We know that it will all be out of his relationships, his connections, that love will come out of friendship, will come out of those kinds of connections, and that we also know that somebody's going to be relatively detached from whoever they're with in the middle part of their life. Now remember, being detached and being in a 9-0 relationship can be devastating. You want your partner to be totally inside of you, and yet you're dealing with a detached 6 line. And that can be very, very cold in there, because there's no place to go. I mean, there's no way out. You're locked in when you're in that environment. The next thing to look at is that when you're looking at his design, and you can see that he is a complex triple split definition. Here is somebody that's, defined from the head to the ajna, and then you have this very interesting hook. You have both channels from the throat to the spleen, then up to the ego and down to the emotion. And then you have the format energy as the third definition below. You've got a triple split emotional generator. A triple split emotional generator. And the moment that you have a generator, you know right away that you have somebody that can only get involved out of response. Only. Now, of course, in the genetic continuity, if you look at that in relationship to the profile, you can see what that really means. This is the voyeur. This is somebody who through the relationships is on the edge watching. That the only way that he's going to properly be involved with somebody is if somebody gets him to respond. Because he's going to have somebody get him to respond. He's a generator. He cannot initiate the relationship. And after all, here's somebody, who has a manifesting capacity in their throat. If you look at this, the way this is aligned, most analysts, when they will look at this chart at first glimpse, will say, aha, this is a manifester. I took you immediately to the generator. Technically, obviously, this is a manifester. You've got the throat connected not simply to one motor, you've got it connected to 2 motors. But you see, the moment that you have a defined sacral center, it dominates. This is a manifesting generator. It's a manifesting generator. Now here's a guy that's a prince, and he's got manifesting capacity to the throat out of his ego and his emotions. You think this person waits to respond? I have a hope in hell that they wait to respond. Blinded by all of that. They're living out their manifesting. And the whole thing about the manifesting generator is that the manifesting generator can have great opportunities in life because they can be instantaneously valuated. Remember that if you ask a generator to do something and they go, you also have to accept that they're going to have to go through various levels before they get to a place of competency where they can be very successful. But the manifesting generator will immediately begin to exhibit signs of competency because of the manifesting ability, constantly being able to metamorphose through the thyroid system. Now, it doesn't mean they do it better, but they will get there faster. They will rush to something. So this manifesting generator, that the key for this manifesting generator is to wait for somebody to recognize their energy, to live out their purpose, be the voyeur. If you're not on the edge of the community around you, you're never going to get your purpose fulfilled because somebody's got to pull you in. Yet here is somebody that you know in their design are not going to live out that purpose. In that design, they're going to live out their manifesting capacity. So when this person comes to you and says, look, I'm having a relationship, I'd like you to take a look at the relationship, you go, no. You go, I will look at your chart first. And then you can come to talk to me in a month or 2 months or 10 years. But I'm going to do your chart first. Because there's no point me telling you about how you mix, this is the whole thing. It's pointless. You can never take somebody who comes to you and they come asking for a partnership reading and neither one of them know their design. You can't do that. Now, I can understand that for some people it gets expensive, obviously. Do each of the partners and do the relationship. But create a bargain for them, give them a break on the price, whatever the case may be, but get them to understand that it's pointless. And the other thing is, don't let them sit in on the reading. I put my hand up like this, back off. It's all right for that partner to go home after and say, would you like to listen to my tape with me? That's different. That has to do with the respect and integrity of that person. But it's not about having, for me, a reading. When I sit with somebody and I do their reading, it's as intimate as anything I do in my whole life. I know that. And I respect that intimacy. I know that there are things that are deeply revealing in that no partner has a right to get access to unless it's given to them by their partner. Not because they overhear it and have their own interpretation and process about that. So it's something to take care with. See, I'm much more concerned about the individual because I know that's where partnership begins. It's not the partnership that's going to make your life better. I mean, if you think your partnership's going to make your life better, you're really messed up. It's not whether your partnership's going to make your life better or worse. It's about whether it's the right relationship. You can have the correct relationship with somebody who's a real pain in the ass. It's all right if it's correct, because that's what you're there to deal with, if it's correct. There's all kinds of lessons in this process, but you have to be yourself, because otherwise then you can't tolerate it. I often tell people that the greatest enemy in your life is somebody that loves you. They're great enemies, eh? Somebody like me who's very individual, I get melancholic. Fortunately, I don't have a partner that comes up to me and says, "Oh, why are you sad?" That's a terrible thing to do to somebody who's emotional or individual. And it's terrible because what you do is that you set them up. You set them up to become the not self. You set them up to make up a reason. And of course, there's no reason. We're just dealing with chemistries. And it's one of those things about partnership. You have to be clear within yourself. You have to be in your relationship as yourself. And all relationships begin with the individual. There is no other place. We've already seen what it means for him. And just based on the late 20th century gossip about this family, that that's not what's lived out there. And you can look at that design and see how easy it is for this man to only live out his manifesting and not pay any attention whatsoever to that generative quality within him. We know what's there for him to live out. We know that. We know that if he accepts that he's a manifesting generator and he experiments, he will see that there are all kinds of forces in this life that recognize his energy and want access to it. And that they will come to that energy. They will always come to that energy. As a matter of fact, he's in the role model position for that. You put your butt on the throne and you wait for everybody to come up and want something from you. It's a classic position. Instead of being the activist, instead of being the active initiating ego leader. See, he can do that once he responds. We have a problem, Your Majesty, with this, that, and that. Should we do something about it? Uh-huh. Okay. Then he can get on his white horse and he can play prince. But only then. And it's the only way that's going to work. And not only that, but this is an emotional generator. Emotional. That means that the authority in this design is no truth in the now. And my keynote for anybody who is emotional, projector, generator, manifester, play hard to get. That's what it's all about. Play hard to get. Your Majesty, I'd like to have your not now. Play hard to get. Make an appointment with me next week. Everything about being an emotional being is about understanding that every time you're able to push away, it's the old joke about diets, that the only good diet is pushing away from the table. You know, the only way for an emotional system to be healed is to push away before it acts. Push away before it responds. Push away. And you see, if your partner is emotional and they have to do that, you have to respect that. You know, you have to know that's the way they work, because when they're pushing away, they may have been up when you first approached them, and you know you're going to lose it as they move down. You know, when partners get involved in all of that, they want to take polls every day. How are you in your wave today? Do you still think that we're going to be able to do that? You know, you have to leave them alone. You know, let them go through without feeling like it's a competition to be able, you see, the moment that awareness takes more time than in the now. Splenic people are forever getting upset with people that take time when they have to make decisions. It drives them crazy. You know, it's like, why can't you get it now? And of course, the worst thing in the world is for an emotional person to be tormented by a splenic person. You know, because the emotional person will then give it to you in the now, and it's not nice at all. And then it's like, no, it's okay, take your time. You know, don't do that to me again. You see, if you don't know your lover and you can't respect them that way. See, if you're going to be in a partnership and you're spontaneous and your partner isn't, just because you know something in the moment, so what? You're a partnership. You have to be able to wait out that wave and accept it. And accept it for what it is, whether you like it or not. It's not about changing your partner. It's not about doing any politicking. You know, it's not about while they're going through their wave, you're going, you know, and it will be really nice, and there's going to be things over here, and, you know. You know, it's not about turning it into that kind of competitive business. That's the nicest thing about knowing your partner's design, is that you don't have to torture yourself about all the things that infuriate you. You know, that's the magic. You can't live with somebody, you can't love somebody without finding them to be absolutely infuriating. You can't. As a matter of fact, if you don't find that they're absolutely infuriating, I guarantee you, you're not in love. And it's not a real relationship. Because honeymoons are short, and human beings are complex. You know, it's the beauty of what it is to be able to go through that process. Because you see, it's not our fault that we can infuriate our partner. It's not our fault. That's the whole thing. The moment you see your partner for what they are, you know, what are you going to do? You can't get in there with a scrub brush and erase it. I mean, you can't. You can't tell them to turn that gate off when they're around you. You know, there's nothing you can do. All this talk that I've heard since I was a child about love and loving your neighbor and loving this and loving that and loving God and being loved, blah, 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 and all this stuff. It's obvious to me that if you allow somebody to be themselves, if they allow you to be yourself, that's love. It doesn't have to feel like love. It doesn't have to look like love. But that's the best love of all. Because you've got somebody who does not want to play your enemy. You've got somebody that doesn't want to play God with you. You have somebody that's not always trying to bend and fix and turn you. And that's what it's all about. You know, and if we cannot accept from the other those things that we do not like, then there's no progress for us. Because it's from the place that we do not like things that we begin to reject, and out of that rejection comes violence and all kinds of other things. It's about acceptance. You know, it's my favorite joke. Assholes are born, they're not made. You know, what to do? It's not like you can punish them for that. It's not like it's their fault. It's not like you can hate them for that. They just are that way. And the moment you see that, you have to embrace their karma. What a trip to be such a being. And they're the best at it, you know, because there's nobody else like them. And nobody appreciates it. Everybody's been trying to make them into a nice person all their life, and they don't want to be. They're not meant to be, and it's really okay, and nobody appreciates that. You see, that's what love is, because I know that if you strip all of this illusion away and you get into the mechanics of how everything works, that person has their intrinsic place, like everything that's in form at any given moment. You know, we're all part of something that's deeply linked and deeply ordered. And there's room in the spectrum, must be, for everything, otherwise we're not whole. That each and every one of these forces out there, they're all correct as long as they're living out their nature. And it's the same with your partner. We do not choose our partners. You know, this is not dance night at Bonanza. Not choose our partners. We're traveling at 545,000 miles an hour in space. You think you got time to figure out how you're going to meet that partner? You think you can change direction along that track? You know, it's one of the great jokes. I mean, after all, there's only one reason why love fascinates us, because we don't know anything about it. We don't know why it starts. We don't know why it ends. We don't know why it lasts as long as it does or as short as it does. We don't know any of that because it's just geometry. You know, I keep on reminding people, if you wake up every morning and you keep on seeing the same face, that's love. I mean, you're in the same geometry. We're not in charge of our geometry. We're not in charge of who's there in our life. We're not. And when you look at your relationship, you also have to see that whether you entered into it as a self, not self, this, that, blah, 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 it's exactly what was there for you. You cannot be to blame for getting into it. You cannot blame your partner for getting you into it. You cannot blame them when it ends. All of that is just a joke. But you can be there in the geometry when they're there. You know, for me, for a very long time in my life, I didn't like having my aura penetrated at all by anybody. I mean, my aura, not just my body, my aura. And you know, one of the things that this knowledge has given me is an understanding of what it means to have people in your geometry. How magical that is. It's not about why they're there or who they are. It's just the experience of them being there. It's a privilege in my life to connect deeply to many, many, many people. It's an incredible thing to see. That's just the geometry. It's the geometry. It's not me. You know, it's not them. And in that, there's love. Because I get to see them always as they can be. And when I'm with them, I take them to that. You see, that's the real magic. It's the real magic of love. See, what design does for you is that in allowing you to experiment with being helpless, you can begin to experiment with love. Experiment with loving yourself, because you get to see that if you follow out the strategy of your type, you're worthy of that love. You're worthy of it. Because there's no part of you that's saying to you, this is all wrong. And at the moment that you can enter into a relationship where you understand your partner and accept them for what they are, you'll see that that's love. It's great. It also saves you a lot of energy. Right? Let's have a break.